Okay, let us start. Again, good afternoon from me. My name is Imo Ilevare, and I direct the STIM Consortium. Really pleased that you are able to join us for this webinar. And this is one in a series of webinars we'll be having this year, this being the first one. So really appreciative that you've done that. You've taken time out of your day to join us. So today's webinar will be delivered by Dr. Deanna Kripko, and she will be talking about navigating the sustainability transition, a case study from UK horticulture. A key part of our talk really is on the selection and sort of the choice and appraisal of technologies. So yeah, we look forward to that as well. In terms of general housekeeping, just a few things to note. Please, if you have any technical issues with the platform Zoom, which we're using today, please register those issues in the chat function, and myself or one of my colleagues will pick that up so we can support you that way. Now, if you have questions related to the presentation, questions for Deanna, there is a Q&A function on the Zoom control panel. Please use that to register your questions, and that gives us a much better chance of managing those questions and making them visible to Deanna. And finally, just a reminder to let you know that we're recording, and we do like to record our webinars so that we can make them available to you for further dissemination to your colleagues, and also for the dissemination on our part to our various members within STIM. So that's it. And then just before I hand over, you might be wondering what STIM is or what it stands for. So STIM, Strategic Technology and Innovation Management Consortium, is a network of companies who have come together so that we can, together with our researchers, share best practice and develop solutions to the challenges that they are having to deal with. So you can see our members on the screen right now, and we take much pride in their collaboration with us. In terms of benefits, in case you'd like to know a bit more about STIM, of course, please do get in contact with us, myself or Louise. But in terms of benefits, our members, of course, have access to the network. They can share ideas, learn from other companies, and so on. We have meetings regularly every year. One of the ways in which we engage with our members is through projects. So every year we have a series of projects that are run, a set of projects that are run, and through collaboration again with our member companies, these projects do come up with very useful insights, which are then made available again to our members first. So there's that preferential access to knowledge coming out of the network. And then there's also the opportunity to, as I said, engage in the projects and actually test out some of the concepts. And there's that ability to then keep using whatever they find useful for as long as they'd like to. So that is STIM in a nutshell. And if you like to know more about it, again, as I said before, get in touch with us. So right now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kripko. She is my colleague. We work very closely together. She's Senior Solution Development Specialist in Technology and Innovation Management, but she has a very strong affinity and expertise in sustainability. So what she's going to be talking to us today is, in that context, sort of a merger or a confluence of both worlds. And so, yeah, I'll be handing over to Deanna at this point. So I'll stop sharing my slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imo. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. It's a very exciting opportunity, and I'm very glad to see everyone who has joined. Look forward to the Q&A to have a bit of more discussion, because I think we share a lot of challenges related to to the topic. I will share my screen. Please let me know, Imo, can you see my screen now? Is it visible?
Yes, I can see your screen. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, my name is Diana Kripko. Thank you very much for joining us today. I would like to talk to you about how we can navigate through sustainability transition, where I think many organizations, many different sectors, of course, nations, governments, communities, so at every level, we observe increasing awareness that we need to transit to a more sustainable future. But there are many different challenges and questions which we are asking ourselves, and I think we are sharing. And I would like to talk about it today on a particular example from a study which we did for UK horticulture sector. I will present the results of the study, but at this stage I would also acknowledge all this amazing support from my colleagues from IFM for scientific advisory provided by Dr. Claire Farouk and Dr. Rob Fal. Thank you very much, because we were using the tools and methodologies which they have researched over many, many years in the study, as well as my colleagues, Dr. Samuel Short and Gosia Franchek, who helped me to actually work on the study and prepare this presentation. So this is a quick agenda overview of what I will be talking about. I will present the overall challenge and then explain you a little bit more background in the case study, because the actual focus of the presentation is on the methodology, because I think this is what we can use for different sectors, for different organizations. However, to make it more tangible, I will be using the examples from the horticulture. So obviously I need to familiarize you a little bit more with the case study. And then we will do a deep dive into the methodology, and in particular focus on the topic of having a portfolio of different technological options and how we can actually make decisions about which of these options are more or less relevant to us or more or less interesting. So there will be a bit of more focus on kind of step 4 on how can we actually select methodologies. Yeah, and then I will give you a bit of a summary from the case study side, because I think there are some things which we can learn from horticulture sector, even if we may be in different other sectors. I think there's some kind of more globalistic, more general insights which I can actually share. And also I would like at the end to talk about the methodological perspective to the study. We will have time for Q&A at the end of my talk, so I very much look forward to have a conversation with you. So starting with introduction, I think one of the key challenges when we talk about sustainability and kind of transitioning to a better, more sustainable future is that we need to apply systems thinking to it. Why? Because we actually realize that anything we change in the system will have implication in the different parts of the system. And this is why we need to think about different technologies and implications of using one or another technology, not only to our factory, not only to our business, but actually outside of it. Therefore, the scope of this talk is twofold, very much focused on introducing you the methodology which we used for the horticulture sector here, to help them to create a portfolio of solutions and then think about how can they link this portfolio to their strategic planning and how they can basically make the right choices. However, as already mentioned, I also would like to share some kind of general insights about what we can learn from the way how UK's horticulture sector is thinking about their decarbonisation pathway, and in particular with focus on their energy systems. So, a few words about the case study itself. UK's horticulture sector, which is encompassing glasshouse operations, which is encompassing indoor farms and vertical farms. So operations, agricultural operations, which are kind of on the field open field are excluded here. They're actually one of the energy intense sectors in the UK. Why? Because of the geographic location, there's actually a lot of need for supplementary energy in terms of light, so electricity, but also in terms of heating to basically bridge the colder periods of the year and still help us to manufacture food. In the past, the way how the system grew, the sector evolved to be very much dependent on fossil fuels, which brings different challenges with itself in terms of sustainability, of course, when we talk about fossil fuels and the implication of it in terms of emissions to the air and subsequently the issues greenhouse gases cause in terms of driving the climate change. However, there's also another perspective and dimension to it, which came in play since about 5 years ago, when we saw what are like implications of dependencies on fossil fuels in terms of when pandemic, for example, has disrupted the supply chains, and then subsequently the geopolitical situation in terms of wars, for example, Russian war in Ukraine. And which brings another dimension to it of being dependent on fossil fuel means also observing challenges and issues related to energy security and subsequently also to food security in terms of food supply and food provision. So this project was aiming to focus on one of the key sources of emissions in the sector, which is energy, and to think about what are the options and opportunities to decarbonize the energy systems within the sector, and then to derive implications in terms of technologies, economic implications, but also kind of overarching recommendations to policy decision makers on how they can support the sector in driving their transition to a more sustainable future. And one more important thing, the study was funded by the UK's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Abbreviation is DEFRA, so now and then I will mention this abbreviation so you know now who the funder of the study was. So in terms of methodology, obviously we had to think about the methodology which will help us to address this very, very big scope for the study. And we came up with a methodology which had 4 phases. The initial phase was obviously to confirm and detail out the objectives, the scope, the system boundaries of the study, and to think about, okay, in detail, what are the different analytical steps which we plan to do. The second phase was very much focused on understanding what is the current status quo in terms of the technological options, in terms of the deployed technologies, in terms of where the market is, what kind of pressures or challenges do we see in this market, and what are the current kind of regulatory perspectives towards the sector. The third phase was then focused on understanding and evaluating different options in terms of creating an understanding on how can we save emissions related to energy demand of the sector and what are the associated costs. And finally, of course, we had to bring all this research together and to define what are the potential transition pathways and what are the implications in terms of the implementation. So now I will deep dive into each of these phases, but I will spend a bit more time on the phase 3 because this is where we use these techniques and methodologies which I particularly would like to share with you in this webinar. So let's start with the first phase, and which was, as I already mentioned, is about detailing out the approach for the study and providing it a structure. And here we used actually a method. We already used a method, which is a strategic road mapping framework, to help us to structure our thinking about this complex topic. So we use the road mapping framework, which you can see here on the slide, which basically gives a structure to think about the transition in terms of defining different elements which are which need to be considered. This includes obviously defining what is actually the timeline we are looking at, and in this case it was until 2050, in alignment with the UK's net zero strategy and subsequent underpinning goals. So we had to think about what is the potential vision, what is the value opportunities which we can leverage from helping horticulture to become more sustainable. Then we had to think about the question why. So why do they need to change? And I already gave you a few ideas about the trends and the drivers which are requiring some change. This is obviously the question what. So what do we want to do about it? So what are the potential decarbonization pathways? And then the question how. So how do we want to do it, which basically comprised the implications which we derived in this report for policymakers. And of course, there were some more implications for further research. And obviously, with the report, we tried to tell the story about where can we go. So what is the opportunity? What is the vision for this sector? Where are we now? So what is current status quo? And obviously the transition pathways. So how can we get to a more sustainable, more resilient horticulture sector in UK? And just to provide a brief outlook of the end output, which you can see now on the slide. I know it's very small, so I will come back to it a bit later at the end of my talk. So let's go to the next phase, which is about understanding the status quo. So of course, we first had to understand what are actually emissions, what is the environmental impact of the sector, so what are the main causes of environmental pollution. And there are actually interesting insights which we gathered and which I found extremely unique and surprising to me in the first step when I was starting to deep dive into the sector. So when we think about the energy systems, well, as I already indicated, there is a lot of electricity demand, there is a thermal energy demand in the sector. But what also was very unique is that actually they're also consumer of carbon dioxide. Why? Because many operations use carbon dioxide to enrich the atmosphere within the glasshouse to help the photosynthesis. Because of the high density of biomass, obviously the plants don't grow if you don't, or they stop growth very slowly because they consume the entire CO2 of the atmosphere. So the farmers and the growers, they typically enrich glasshouse atmosphere with CO2. Sounds interesting, sounds very much linked to the opportunity of circular economy, because suddenly we have a CO2 sink. But what happens in reality is that about 70% of the CO2, which is actually added into the atmosphere, is then ventilated back and basically released in the environment. So we add another pollution source. So in terms of the energy demand, we were able to derive 3 types of, let's say, consumers, or 3 types of operations. There are types of subsectors of the horticulture sector, which are basically using for their operations kind of transparent and open, partially open glass houses, where they use the light from the natural light. And what they do during winter or like cold period of time is that they have a heating system which they operate to basically, to help the growing process. There are types of horticulture, like types of glass houses where they actually have an additional lighting system which they operate. So their energy demand has not only the thermal component, but actually also they require quite a lot of electrical power to supplement their natural light. And then there is a third type of operations which are completely enclosed, indoor kind of type of farms, which can be like indoor farm, and sometimes they are vertical farms, so there are different designs to them. But these operations are again very different because they actually don't have access to natural light, so they have a lot of electricity demand. And then they partially have actually not only to heat, but actually also to cool and ventilate way more than the other operations do it, because they have to use additional ventilation system, whereas in other glass house types, they can actually just open the windows more or less. So here we derived the three types of facilities, and we actually looked on their energy demand, and which you can see on the bottom of the slide. We use Sankey diagrams, which are a typical technique to basically summarize, to visualize what are the proportions of different energy flows. And what is important in the settings that currently the prevalent technologies they use is combined heat and power generation. Why? For certain reasons, it is suitable. First of all, of course, those who need a lot of thermal energy, they can generate it on site. Those who need electric power, they also generate it on site. However, in most cases, they also sell part of the electricity they generate back to the national grid, which helps to diversify the income streams for the farms. And what is also important in this process, why this technology became so much prevalent in this market, is because the CO2, which is within the exhaust gases of the combustion process, is actually used to enrich the atmosphere within the glasshouse. But as I already mentioned to you, the most of it is actually released back into the atmosphere. So the question was, what can we do about to help them to decarbonize and move away from a gas-fired, so typically natural gas-fired CHPs, to other renewable sources of energy. And here we had to look into available options at the first step. And of course, when we talk about energy transition and when we talk about decarbonizing our energy systems, the first step we need to do is to think about energy efficiency. And you can see here a diagram. There are many different options in terms of energy efficiency available to farmers and growers, which comprise maintenance and operation management and measures. There are things around equipment optimization, for example, associated with the pumps and motors they use. It's also about the building and glass house structure as such. There are options of using energy storage to basically store the excess heat, for example, which they may not need immediately for their operations, or not to the entire, not the entire 100%, and so on. So there are different options, and of course, we need to start from thinking about how can we reduce our energy demand, how can we make the operations more efficient before we think about investing in any infrastructure. However, the second step was obviously to map out all possible technologies and solutions available in terms of energy generation and energy conversion. So you see now on the right this very colorful graph, and I'm very aware there's a lot of detail to it. So in essence, what does it summarize? It summarizes different renewable resources available. So for instance, solar radiation, it's thermal energy sources, it's other like alternative energy carriers, and it's electricity, of course. With kind of a small side note that in this case, we think about renewably generated electricity. So we can utilize all these types of renewable sources to basically generate electric and thermal energy using different technologies. So this is what you see on this graph, different technologies. Some of them will be located somewhere remotely. Some of them can be co-located, and some of them can be co-located or be at an actual site, installed on the actual site. So we mapped out all these technologies and solutions. And the next question was, which we need to understand about what are those key factors which may influence how well or not well a technology can be upscaled in this sector, right? And we talk about upscaling here because, of course, as more growers and farmers implement a more environmentally friendly solution, then more it will help us to decarbonize the sector as such. So now I'm moving into this step where I would like to spend a little bit more time with you and basically explain a bit more in detail this analysis process. So when we think about the factors, there are obviously many different factors, technological factors, economic, environmental factors, which we may consider. So to help us to approach the definition of factors, we actually used a tool developed by our colleague, Dr. Claire Farouk, which is called Innovation Velocity Tool. So this tool is aiming to, or it provides a set of different factors and dimensions to describe on how a new innovative technology can be uptaken by a particular business, right? So it's coming from the idea of understanding basically how fast or how slow a technology may be implemented and what are the reasons for it. And if we know the reasons, the next step is obviously we can think about solutions to basically speed up the uptake process. So this tool provides 16 different factors which are describing the kind of internal perspectives in terms of the technology itself and its kind of strengths and weaknesses. It describes the kind of business perspective and how the business itself operates. It describes the external factors, which encompass factors describing the ecosystems, the supply chain perspective, and of course the market as such, including the kind of market perspective, market drivers, as well as, for example, regulation. So having this tool, what we did is that we actually customized it, and we were able to derive a set of 7 factors based on this tool, which we then used to understand which technologies, which solutions can be uptaken by horticulture more or less fast, and what are the barriers for the uptake. So you can see the factors now on the right side of the slide, which are describing basically the technology readiness level, right? So what is technical feasibility if we talk about a particular technology, and linked to it is obviously the commercial perspective. So what is the business case? What is the economic viability of the particular technology or solution? It's the environmental performance, right? So when we move to alternative technologies, so for instance, when we talk about replacing natural gas with biogas, I mean, there are still some issues surrounding it, environmental issues, and what we need to consider is that we are not just shifting the impact from, emissions in the air into emissions into water, soil, or kind of impact on biodiversity, for example, right? Then it's obviously about organizational and ecosystems requirements and capacities. So do we have sufficient, do we have a supply chain which will provide us the technology to the extent as we need as a sector as such? And don't forget that we were aiming to provide implications for policymakers, which obviously for them, they have to think at sector perspective, and they have to design policies and incentives which will help to scale up a technology. And obviously it has to be available to a certain extent. But it's also about skills. It's about labor availability. So when we talk about installers for photovoltaic panels, etc., which can be a massive bottleneck to uptake a particular technology. It's obviously about the potential of technology to create an additional societal value, right? It's about the acceptance, and here we talk again about different stakeholders. It's about acceptance from the society itself, it's about consumer and retailer acceptance. And here I have a very nice example from one of the solutions we were looking at, was to collocate the farming and growing operations with factory or kind of operations which have a lot of exhaust heat, like wasted heat, where we can just use this heat, you know, install, like put additional pipes in the ground and just use this waste heat from the operations to basically run the heating system in the glass house, for example. The problem is, I think the consumer acceptance will fall massively if we collocate tomato growing operations with a nuclear power plant, right? So the acceptance of the final product might be a bit different to, for example, if we install a heat pump in the operation. So we had to consider these aspects in the system. And this goes back actually to the system thinking challenge, which I have introduced in the beginning. And finally, of course, it is about the suitability of this technology with the existing policy and regulation. Of course, we were working on providing recommendations to policymakers, but of course, uptake and how quickly a technology can be taken up by the sector very much depends on how much I need to change actually in my regulatory framework. And of course, as big as a change needed, as more time it will take. So you remember this nice, colorful graph with all different possibilities and options for technologies. So the next step was to take these technologies and to take these 7 factors and to think about, okay, what does it mean, like for each technology individually? And here we used the SWOT to structure our research and our data collection. So basically what we collected for each technology on each factor is what are kind of technological strengths and weaknesses, and what are the opportunities and threats related to this factor and from this technology from the market perspective. And then the question was, which we aim to answer is the alternative technology or alternative solution performing better or worse on this factor than the baseline technology? And here, in terms of performing, I mean all 4 components of SWOT. So not only technical perspective, but also the market perspective. And we used a scoring scale from -2 to 2. But what is important, it was a comparative analysis. So on the scale, 0 was the gas-fired CHP, which is the prevalent, dominant technology at the moment in the market, which we are aiming to replace. So the question on each factor for each technology we had to answer is, are we less good or are we better than CHP, gas-fired CHP? This is important. Again, to help this analysis, to make this analysis, we actually created not only detailed definitions for each factor, but actually detailed definition for each scaling, like for each score. So we have something like we call scaling statement, basically for each stage on the scale, which you can see now on the right side. I know it's not readable, but it's just to give you a taste of the approach. So when we have developed this framework, obviously we compiled the analysis and we were able to derive kind of not recommendation, but to derive the emphasis on in terms of what types of options do we have and how do they perform in comparison to gas-fired, natural gas-fired CHP. So you can see here a screenshot of a result. You don't see all the technologies right now, which you saw on this colorful slide, because there will be too many. But a selection of those which were also considered as most interesting or most promising for the sector. And what you can see here is that we came up with, first of all, a combination of technologies, because when we talk about CHP, we need to think about 2 components, electricity and thermal energy. So all of them are kind of co-located with renewable energy generation. And then, of course, one option is to replace the fuel of CHP. So, for example, using biofuels and potentially even co-locate them with anaerobic digester. It is a heat pump and kind of renewable energy source for electricity generation, for example, photovoltaics. And it is using the waste heat and together with renewable electricity generation. So the next step was we had this kind of high-level analysis. What we also wanted to understand, what will be actually the costs of saving carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So here we used actually another technique, which is called MAC analysis. MAC stands for marginal abatement costs of carbon. And we actually calculated the costs for carbon saving across the entire sector. So the unit of analysis was the horticulture sector in UK. We calculated it for both energy efficiency measures, which I have presented to you a few slides earlier, but also for those generation and conversion technologies and solutions. And what is interesting in this analysis is that you see some of the measures are kind of below the x-axis and some are above. So you might ask yourself, what does it mean? The meaning is quite simple. Those measures which are underneath the axis are those which not only provide us some carbon saving or emission saving, they also help us to save, generate monetary savings, right? Typically, energy efficiency measures, right? So I'm able not only to immediately actually generate economic benefit. So examples here are different maintenance solutions. These are improvements in terms of the motors and pumps, and some intelligent solutions which are providing more data and help us to maybe switch off the aggregates which you don't need at a certain time, and so on. Those measures which are above the curve are these which will require some additional investment. And in the first step, they will not generate immediately monetary savings, but they will generate carbon savings. And you can see in comparison way more, like if you look across the entire sector. Again, what is important here is this is exactly the area which became very interesting to the policymakers, because this is where they may want to support the sector. Okay, let's move to the next step. Now we have all these insights about the current status. We have, I didn't talk much about the vision, but we had analysis about what is the potential vision, what are those trends and drivers driving the sector. And I gave you an example of disturbances in supply chain, disturbances or pressures in terms of increasing energy prices due to geopolitical drivers and so on. We looked on different technological options, and what we came up with is that actually there's not one solution which will just replace CHP. There's actually a pathway which will involve different solutions, and they will come into the market and they will phase out of the wall. So for example, the existing CHP, they're quite easy to switch from natural gas to biofuels. But obviously, it's not a long-term solution. It's also biofuels will, at the moment, they don't look like a solution which will serve the entire market. Another example is electrification, an important approach, using electricity to generate also thermal energy. However, at the moment, we need to consider that at least our gas coming from electricity coming from national grid is not yet carbon neutral. And also it is very expensive. So at the moment, these solutions are not economically viable, and so on. So we have presented different options which need to be considered in combination. And then we looked on different challenges which they are observed or faced by the market in terms of taking these solutions. And we summarize different implications in terms of how can we support the transition of the sector. And what you can see here basically in this structure, this is a framework which I have presented to you in the beginning. We have refined it a little bit, but the structure of the road mapping framework is actually exactly the same. We have our vision, we have the timeline, we have the 3 questions, why, what, and how, and we have kind of a detailed explanation of what are the answers to these questions. So I move now to kind of final conclusions and summaries from the study. First, I would like to share with you some insights which we gained from working on the study with the horticulture sector. And what we realized is that, first of all, when you talk about decarbonization, when you talk about energy transition, you need to start with energy efficiency. This is key. You need to think about how can you encourage, optimize your energy demand. Then the second key insight is that there's actually no one-size-fits-all solution in terms of technology, and there will be always a technology mix. And the question of how you will select a technology will also require a detailed understanding on what are those renewable resources which you have in a particular location, co-located with you. So some of the farmers, they have an anaerobic digester, and it's very easy for them to switch the CHP immediately to, let's say, biofuels. However, some of them are maybe co-located with a food factory which has a lot of waste heat, and where we can think about using the waste heat from the factory to supply the farmers, and so on. So we need to have this local perspective and understanding on what is available there in terms of local resources. And this will basically have implications on your technology selection. What is also important in terms of energy technologies is that we observe that the system is changing towards a smaller and more modular technologies. And what is also important, there's a lot of speed in terms of innovation, how fast we innovate and update and improve these technologies, which has implications in terms of how you design your business model as a farmer, right? So there's some uncertainty, some risk you have to deal with and to address. And there's some certain flexibility needed in terms of how we do strategic planning, and this not only on a business level, but actually also on the level of the entire country. So our regulation needs to be designed in a way that it allows new technologies coming into the market and basically replacing the outphasing technologies. And finally, we also need to think about that when we talk about sustainability transition, it is not about focusing only on your business or only on your sector. We have to open up our thinking in order to leverage potential which can come up by linking to other sectors, to linking to other opportunities in order to leverage greater potential in terms of sustainability. And very final slide to sum up the methodology which we have created, which comprised 4 different stages. We use different tools to structure the study. We use a strategic road mapping framework with the key questions which we were answering along the way. We used tools which like, for example, Sankey diagrams, etc., to better understand and basically the energy demand of the sector, and then to to identify some patterns in terms of energy demand. We mapped possible technological options, and then we use this innovation velocity tool to derive 7 factors, which can be, I think, applicable to other sectors as well, in order to understand the strengths and weaknesses or kind of limitations and opportunities coming with adoption of a particular technology. And then finally, we brought all this information together back into the strategic road mapping framework to basically define what are those transition pathways and what are the implications for the implementation. Thank you very much. I stop here and will just be curious to see whether you have any questions or thoughts, ideas to share with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you. Remember, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A panel. We have a comment or question from M. Verma, and I'm going to read it slowly because it's quite a lot in terms of words. So I think it starts with a comment. Systems thinking normally drives an approach of understanding and implementing solutions that consider needs of all stakeholders. How was this covered in this case study? And then it follows with another comment, I think. I don't feel that this was a systems thinking approach, more of a deterministic approach. So I think the question is, how was the consideration of all stakeholders considered in this study that you did?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and thank you for bringing it up, because indeed I cut short on this topic, how we actually engage with the sector, how we engage with all stakeholders. Actually, part of the study was to do a stakeholder mapping and understand who are all these different stakeholders in the sector, and then to think about how do we engage with the stakeholders. So obviously, policymakers represented by DEFRA were part of the study itself. We also engaged and collaborated very closely with NFU, which is Association of National Associations of Farmers and Growers here in the UK. And they were involved and consulted throughout the entire study to capture the perspective, obviously, of one of the key stakeholders of the study. However, we also run, in particular, when we did our technology analysis, I do it differently. So when we did our technology analysis, we actually interviewed different stakeholders. We interviewed stakeholders who are representing the sector from different perspectives, so farmers and growers, but also kind of part of the sector who like installers and project developers who are developing, who are basically planning and implementing the, for example, different energy system setups in the farming operations. We also interviewed people who were experts in particular technologies, right, to capture a better understanding in terms of, okay, if we talk about heat pump, what does it mean in terms of the heat pump sector and manufacturer perspective, etc. And what are the limitations there from maybe potentially supply chain and so on. So we did it for all technologies. We spoke to the experts. And also what we did is that after the technology analysis, we had a workshop where we invited the representatives of the different stakeholder groups and where we reviewed the results from the technology analysis, and then together, we investigated what are the priority challenges for uptake of these technologies. And then when we were deriving the implications, these were mainly based on the insights which we gathered from this engagement and involvement with stakeholders. Yeah, so we did it through interviews, quite a few interviews, and we did it through a stakeholder engagement workshop. I hope this helps to address this question. I know I didn't mention it in the study. I was so much focused on the tools and methods. So thank you very much for bringing it up. I think it's a very important question, and you're absolutely right. Part of systems thinking is engaging with stakeholders. And I hope it helps now to understand how we did it.
Thank you, Diana. We have another, it looks more like a comment, but maybe you can respond to it. So we got someone who said, they are interested about the energy modeling for the sector. It really doesn't have a full question behind it, but I wonder whether you can say a bit more about the energy modeling, if at all, for the sector, Stan.
Yeah. Before I open this, answer this question, I actually see that Mr. Verma asked where they can get the paper. Also, very good question. So you will find the report, the full report with all the detail on DEFRA Science Search website. So you can see here the link. You can go to the website and you will find the report on their website. You can download for free, so it's available. Okay, in terms of the second question, interested about the energy modeling for the sector, it's also actually very good, a very, very good point. In terms of energy modeling, so one of the key challenges we observed actually access to the data. Luckily, we had NFU as one of the key collaborators who are collecting data on energy demand from different businesses in the UK, like growing and farming businesses. It is voluntary, so not everyone is contributing. So we had to make some estimates about, scaling up from the sector, part of the sector. We had the data, quite detailed data about the energy demand to, the entire sector, which we did together with experts from NFU. And then, as I said, we consulted with basically sector experts in terms of or who helped us basically in detail to derive the Sankey diagrams. Okay, so who helped us to understand what is the split between thermal and electric energy demand, what is the split between self-consumption and export to the grid, and how different it is between different types of operations which we have specified. And then this data was also used for the MAC analysis later on, which obviously required some kind of modeling and calculation. We had to do quite a lot of assumptions. We actually ran a scenario analysis. So we did parameter variations and sensitivity analysis. For instance, what happens if the electricity price drops or grows? What happens when, because we expect that the carbon footprint of our national grid electricity will decrease over the period of time? What does it mean in this situation in terms of, marginal abatement costs of carbon savings and so on? Again, you can find these scenarios in the report as well.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, go on.
The link. Apologies, I can actually post the link here, maybe in chat, so everyone has access.
Yeah. Okay. So while you're doing that, there's another question now. Okay, thank you. So there's got a thank you in response to that question. I have a question, and this one is something that we are together again dealing with at the moment on another project. And it in fact relates to this very slide, the point number 4. When organizations are looking at new technologies and trying to figure out what to invest in, the fact that for these new and emerging technologies, there's a lot of change happening and there's a lot of improvement in performance. Could you say a bit more about that and how that affects how people may choose or not choose to invest in a technology, or in fact, maybe do things like looking at how to make use or recycle those technologies if that's something they want to do?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question. And what is interesting about this point that On the one side, it's amazing driver. So we are constantly changing. We're improving our, solar panels. We're improving our heat pumps in terms of their efficiency and so on. At the same time, it can be observed as a massive barrier to uptake of these technologies in the market. Why? Because it's obviously difficult to make a business plan with a technology which may, where in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, you will have a totally different kind of more efficient option in the market, and you actually observe lots of uncertainties. Like, for example, when we take the photovoltaic example, there's a lot of uncertainty about end of life. There's a lot of uncertainty about, okay, if it fails, can I refurbish it? And, is there a second life for old photovoltaic panels, where we actually know that in that period of time, there will be way more efficient technology in the market. So it's uncertainty related to business planning, but then there's also uncertainty on kind of thinking about sustainability transition at the sector level. Because obviously I want to plan with I obviously how do I convince somebody to give to basically pay for second life solar panel, where there may be in the market the technology which is way more efficient, right? So it may be a barrier to circularity, for example, when we think about circularity, etc. However, again, there are solutions we're thinking about, or other people are thinking about towards it, in terms of, for example, reusing parts or recycling the materials and using them for other products.
Thank you. So yes, thank you so much, Diana. We are coming towards the end of our time together. And I think it's a good place to end things. Would like to thank everybody for giving their time to join us, and we hope you found this very enlightening. And please do join us for subsequent webinars. If you'd like to, we will be posting, of course, the times and schedules for those webinars. But also, if you have any questions regarding the STIM Consortium and how you might join, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me or with my colleagues. And in fact, also you can get in touch with Diana, because we work very closely together, and she'll pass on your details. But yeah, get in touch with me or with Louise. But yeah, at this point, again, a massive thank you to you all. And yeah, have a lovely rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.